Well, hey there, dragons, and welcome to this instructional video for Lesson 2, Part 6, Imperfectly Competitive Markets. The main idea behind this economics lesson is imperfectly competitive markets have fewer sellers offering fewer products, usually at higher prices. With that in mind, by the end of watching this video, you'll be able to describe the structure of an oligopoly, define a monopoly, identify the types of monopolies that exist, and describe the factors that affect prices in oligopolies and monopolies. Now that the outcomes for this lesson have been shared with you, let's get started. You now know why you have such a large selection of jeans to choose from when you go shopping. The competitive structure of the jeans market encourages sellers to meet consumer demand, but also encourages them to differentiate their jeans. Not all markets, however, are structured as competitively as the jean market. The cable television market, for example, typically has been imperfectly competitive or even non-competitive. In most areas of the United States, this market has been dominated by just one or two sellers. Fewer sellers generally means fewer products and less choice for consumers like you. An imperfectly competitive structure also usually results in higher prices. The most commonly non-competitive market in the United States is the oligopoly, a market structure in which a few large sellers control most of the production of a good or service. In general, an oligopoly exists when three conditions are present. There are only a few large sellers, sellers offer identical or similar products, and other sellers cannot enter the market easily. The existence of a few large sellers is the defining characteristic of an oligopoly. No other market structure has this feature. A market is considered an oligopoly when the largest 3 or 4 sellers produce most, perhaps 70% or more, of the market's total output. When there are a few large sellers, each one has a large share of the overall sales in the market. Because the sellers have so much at stake, they are less likely to take risks, such as offering new products. If a seller introduced a new product that failed, for example, that seller's share of the market and its profits likely would drop significantly. Thus, sellers in an oligopoly tend to offer identical or similar products. A few sellers can maintain their control only if other sellers cannot easily enter the market. The relative difficulty of entering an oligopolistic market depends on startup costs, government regulation about entering the market, and consumer loyalty to the established seller's products. If any of these factors is insignificant enough, other sellers can enter the market, compete with the original few sellers, and end those sellers' oligopoly. The few sellers in an oligopolistic market have more control over prices than do the many sellers in a monopolistically competitive one. This control stems mainly from legal methods of determining prices. Sometimes, however, oligopolies try to control prices through illegal means. Like sellers in monopolistic competition, sellers in an oligopoly control prices somewhat through non-price competition. That is, oligopolistic sellers attempt to differentiate their products through advertising and by encouraging consumers to develop loyalty to particular brand names. Non-price competition can become fierce among sellers in an oligopoly. Consider the market for breakfast cereals. Although a trip to the grocery store might make you think that dozens of cereal makers battle for the highest market share, only 3 companies, Kellogg's, General Mills, and Post, account for about 80% of sales. The market is actually an oligopoly in which a few companies differentiate their products by creating numerous brand names. Sellers in an oligopoly also maintain a degree of control over price through interdependent pricing, or by being very responsive to or dependent on the pricing actions of their competitors. Interdependent pricing is particularly common in oligopolies because sellers are reluctant to risk their market share, causing them to not only offer similar products, but also offer them at similar prices. The most common form of interdependent pricing is price leadership, in which one of the largest sellers in the market takes the lead by setting a price for its product. If competitors also institute that price, the market leader has in effect controlled the price of all products. What happens if the competing companies do not institute the same price as the market leader? In this case, the leader has not successfully affected the price of its product. In fact, it might be forced to change its price again to be competitive with the other seller's prices. A failed pricing policy may spark a price war, in which sellers aggressively undercut each other's prices in an attempt to gain market share. Price wars can initially benefit consumers by lowering prices. Some sellers, however, can be severely hurt by price wars. If this level of competition lasts a long time, a seller may lose so much money that it is forced out of business, something that has happened to some airline carriers in the United States, for example. When a price war ends, prices tend to rise again as oligopolistic sellers return to price leadership and non-price competition. If one or more sellers have gone out of business, prices may rise even higher than before the price war because of reduced competition. Thus, in the long run, consumers may not benefit from severe price wars. Non-price competition and price leadership are legal methods of determining prices. On the other hand, collusion, when sellers secretly agree to set production levels or prices for their products, is illegal and carries heavy penalties such as fines and even prison sentences for those involved. Collusion tends to raise prices higher than they would be under the competitive forces of supply and demand. This interference with competitive trade is viewed as undesirable, but the lure of higher profits may sometimes tempt companies in oligopolistic markets to set prices. Collusion is sometimes based on an informal agreement to coordinate production decisions. In other cases, however, sellers form a cartel, in which companies openly organize a system of price setting and market sharing. Cartels are illegal in the United States because they fix prices. Many other countries, however, allow the formation of cartels. Several cartels are international organizations that coordinate the production levels and prices of natural resources such as oil and diamonds. These types of goods lend themselves to being controlled by a cartel because they do not vary much. One country's oil is very much like another's. This means that sellers in the market cannot significantly differentiate their product and thus encounter incentives to coordinate with other sellers. Cartels often are unstable and short-lived. Members may be tempted to produce more than their agreed-upon market share in order to earn more profits. In response, the other sellers in the cartel may raise their output to protect their market share and profits. As production rises and supply increases, prices fall and competitive pressure increases among the cartel members. A price war can then break out, effectively dissolving the cartel. Some cartels have maintained power over their markets for generations. For example, an international diamond cartel headed by South Africa's De Beers Company has controlled the sale of rough diamonds around the world since the 1920s. Although De Beers directly produces only a fraction of the world's diamonds, it dominates the market, creating scarcity by buying and stockpiling stones from other producers. Because a monopoly's market structure dictates that a single seller controls all production of a good or service, the conditions found in a monopoly are the opposite of those found in perfect competition. In general, a monopoly exists when three conditions are present. There is a single seller, no close substitute goods are available, and other sellers cannot enter the market easily. A monopoly is identifiable by the presence of only one seller. No other market structure has this feature. By establishing total control of the production of a good or service, the single seller can monopolize the market. In most regions of the United States, a single cable television company traditionally has controlled the market. Homes and businesses in a community must buy their cable television service from the single cable company because there are no other sellers in the area. A lack of close substitute goods reinforces a single seller's monopoly over the market. A substitute good is one that consumers will use to replace the purchase of a similar but higher priced good. In the case of a monopolistic cable television market, consumers cannot buy the service from another seller or easily substitute a similar good for it. Some households need cable to have their basic television reception, including network broadcasts. Moreover, many viewers who receive network broadcasts without cable do not consider network programming to be a substitute for the hundreds of channels available on cable. For a single seller to maintain a monopoly, other sellers must not be able to easily enter the market. The difficulty of entering a monopolistic market depends on startup costs and the level of technical knowledge needed. If either of these factors is low enough, other sellers can enter the market, compete with the original single seller, and end that seller's monopoly. The development of monopolies is made more difficult by government regulation. The cable television market, for example, is hard to enter. Installing a cable system into homes and then maintaining it is an expensive task that requires technological expertise. In addition, government restrictions traditionally have prevented competitors from entering cable markets. Although the government is changing its regulations, most cable markets today remain monopolistic. How does a single seller establish a monopoly over a market? Certain conditions make it likely and sometimes even advantageous for consumers that a monopoly will form in a particular market. There are four main types of monopolies: natural, geographic, technological, and government. Each of these forms under different conditions. In some markets, competition is inconvenient and impractical. These natural monopolies feature a single large seller that produces a good or service most efficiently. Usually, the seller can do so because of its economies of scale. That is, the seller's large scale or size allows it to use its human, capital, and other resources more efficiently and economically than if those resources were divided among several smaller producers. Public and private utilities, like electric companies and cable television services, are natural monopolies. Because of the immense startup, equipment, and maintenance cost of utilities, it would be inefficient for more than one seller to provide this type of service in an area. Imagine if several electric companies tried to compete in your community. Each company would have to build and maintain its own grid of electrical lines, and your street might have 2 or 3 times as many utility poles and electrical wires as it does now. As a result, governments give utilities and other natural monopolies the exclusive right to provide certain goods or services in a specific area. The government closely regulates these monopolies, however, to ensure that they provide quality service at reasonable prices. Sometimes a monopoly forms because a market's potential profit is so limited by its geographic location that only a single seller decides to enter the market. These markets are geographic monopolies. A general store in a remote community, for example, has a geographic monopoly on groceries and many common household items. The number of geographic monopolies in the United States has declined in recent decades. One reason is that as people have become increasingly mobile, they can travel longer distances to shop. This means that even in rural areas, more sellers can reach more buyers than ever before. Sellers in remote areas also face competition from mail order companies, which use telephones, fax machines, and delivery services to compete in markets that were once geographic monopolies. Some monopolies develop when a producer develops new technology that enables the creation of a new product or that changes the way an existing product is made. These types of markets are technological monopolies. General Dynamics, for example, developed the technology to build Trident submarines for the U.S. Navy. It is the only company with this technology, giving it a monopoly in the Trident submarine market. What prevents other sellers from using General Dynamics technology to produce Trident submarines and compete in the market? Sellers may protect their inventions or technology they develop by applying to the U.S. government for patents. A patent grants a company or an individual the exclusive right to produce, use, rent, and sell an invention or discovery for a limited time, 17 years in the United States. In effect, a patent gives a seller a 17-year monopoly over its product. Written works and works of art are protected in much the same way. By granting copyrights, the U.S. government gives authors, musicians, and artists exclusive rights to publish, duplicate, perform, display, and sell their creative works. Governments often run monopolies, usually of basic necessities like public utilities. In the United States, cities and towns may monopolize water and sewer services. The federal and state governments have a monopoly over the building and maintenance of roads, bridges, and canals in the United States. Any market in which a government is the sole seller of a product is a government monopoly. Government monopolies provide public goods that cannot always be supplied through the normal workings of the price system. Because these monopolies are providers of goods and services that enhance the general welfare, they usually have public support. The single seller in a monopolistic market has a great deal of control over prices. Think again about a cable television company. In theory, the company can dictate the price of its cable service. In practice, however, the seller in a monopoly cannot just charge any price it wants. Three forces limit the seller's control over prices: consumer demand, potential competition, and government regulation. The first factor influencing the seller's ability to set prices is consumer demand for its product. At some point, the price of a product can become so high that the quantity demanded falls to zero. If the price of cable television, for example, were to reach $300 a month, most consumers would stop subscribing to the cable service. The second condition limiting the seller's control is potential competition. A monopolistic cable company may make an enormous profit from an extremely high service price. At some point, however, these profits are high enough to attract other cable providers in the market, whereas high entry costs had kept competitors out at lower prices. The third force affecting sellers in a monopoly is government regulation. To protect consumers from paying unnecessarily high prices, governments monitor and regulate monopolies. This regulation watches over quantity, quality, and prices of products. So that's the way it is with Lesson 2, Part 6, Imperfectly Competitive Markets. At this point, you should know that oligopolies have a few large sellers controlling most of the production of a good or service through non-price competition and interdependent pricing, and monopolies have a single seller controlling the entire production of a good or service. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel to have the entire catalog of economics videos available at your fingertips. Click the subscribe button and then click the follow bell to receive notifications as to when the channel is updated. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in class, Dragons!